My name is Mitch Fleischer. I'm the co-president of the Berkeley Historical Society and Museum, and I'd like to welcome you to our Ferry Forum. BHSM is a louder? Okay, louder. Whoa, not that loud. Okay, hopefully this is good. We're a volunteer organization dedicated to education and the preservation of Berkeley history. Our current exhibit on the waterfront, the other side of Berkeley, is open for a half hour after the program. Our museum is typically open Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays from 1 to 4, and you're all welcome to come look at our exhibit. We also have extensive archives about Berkeley history, much of which is available on our website, berkhistory.org. We also have extensive paper archives, which are cataloged on our website, and you're welcome to use those archives Friday from 1 to 4 when our archivist will be present, as well as by appointment. As a volunteer organization, we depend on membership and donations to continue our operations. Please join if you're not already a member. There's information on the table outside the door. We also welcome donations in the jar at the door as you leave. This program is co-sponsored with the Berkeley Waterfront Community Coalition. We thank them for their help in organizing this event. BWCC is a nonprofit started in 2023 to raise awareness of waterfront communities and marina developments. Please check out their website, and there's information in the table outside for information about waterfront activities and developments on the Ferry plan. Our format today is going to be a little different. We won't have the typical speakers in PowerPoint. What we're going to do is have each panelist answer what we're calling a core question about the ferry. And we'll then have the other panelists respond to that question. So we'll go through 4 core questions, and then we'll turn it over to question and answer from the audience. So please hold your questions until the end. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Councilmember Terry Taplin was originally scheduled to be part of this panel, but he had to cancel at the last minute, and he's being replaced by Camille Antinori from BWCC. So in terms of introductions, Camille teaches environmental economics at San Francisco State and is the author of several research articles on the Berkeley Waterfront and San Francisco Bay. She inaugurated the Marina Planning Chair at Cal Sailing Club and founded the Berkeley Waterfront Community Coalition in 2023. Chuck Wollenberg is an historian, former Berkeley City College instructor, and social sciences coordinator, and the author of Berkeley, A City in History, published by UC Press, a book that I hope all of you have read or will read soon. He's a longtime member of the Berkeley Historical Society Board. Randy Rentschler retired after a 30-year career as Director of Legislation and Communications at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, where he played a central role in shaping Bay Area transportation policy. He wrote the legislation that created the Water Emergency Transportation Authority, which serves as the operating authority for San Francisco Bay's ferries. And he's an adjunct instructor at UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. And last but not least, Jim McGrath has spent more than 50 years working to protect the environment, improve water quality, and expand public access to the shoreline through leadership roles with the California Coastal Commission, EPA, and the Port of Oakland. He served as a commissioner on the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, as well as Berkeley's Waterfront Parks, Recreation and Waterfront, and Public Works Commissions. So let me start with a history question for our historian on the panel. That would be Chuck Wollenberg. Berkeley has had ferry service as a transit option before and lost it. What does that history tell us about what makes ferry service for transit succeed or fail here? And are those conditions present today?
Thank you.
You're close to the mic.
Thank you. I'm glad to be the token historian on the
history panel, yes.
You know, there have been ferries operating in the San Francisco Bay for 175 years. And as far as I can tell, in that 175-year period, there's only been about 10 or 11 years in which there's been regular scheduled ferry service between San Francisco and Berkeley. So, in kind of answer to your question, the idea if suddenly conditions are favorable for a ferry in Berkeley, it would be really almost the first time. There have been two major attempts to establish a ferry. One of them, the one that occurred in the 1920s, 20s and early 30s, lasted for about 7 or 8 years. And that's as long as the ferry service has actually been in service in Berkeley in that whole 175-year period. I think one thing, and we can get into more of the history, one thing the history does show is that you cannot run a ferry system on private enterprise. Even as early as the 1870s, private ferries from Berkeley to San Francisco were not viable, and they're certainly not viable today. So if we're going to have a ferry, it's going to have to be with significant public subsidies, and whether that makes sense or not, and if it does, how much of those subsidies should be and who should pay them. Those are all issues that I'm sure the rest of the panel is perfectly willing to discuss. I don't know whether that answers your question. It does provide a little history.
It does talk about the history. Randy, would you like to comment on Chuck has had to say?
I fear that, but look, on the history part, one way to think about it is what's happening with your neighbor in Alameda. So,
Closer to the mic.
sorry, thank you. So one way to think about history is what's happening to your neighbor in Alameda. So they had no history of ferry service at all. And since the Loma Prieta earthquake, they've developed the most successful East Bay ferry service, by far. And so can we currently change the conditions so that ferry service can work? The answer is yes, but it doesn't come for free. Like, you have to do something to make that happen. And for those of you that have gone to New York City and seen their ferry service, which is very impressive, they too had to do something to make that happen. And that lesson would be true for Berkeley too.
Camille?
Yeah,
You have to be real close to the mic.
real close to the mic. You know,
Real
can I
close
pass
to the
To
mic.
Jim, and then I'll come back and
Okay,
get my
fine.
question.
Sure. I'll try to make Chuck feel not quite so alone. I'm also a historian as well as a civil engineer, and it's probably the best habit to do the research and go to original sources, so you're not alone. One further comment on the history. There's also, in the last 10 years, been 2 small ferry operations, one operated by Prop SF and the other by Tidelines. There's not much publicity about them, but when I got the records, the most daily departures of that was 91. Genentech fully subsidized it for a while and has stopped doing that. Now they run a bus out of the marina. So there's a little more to the history, but again, not much ridership.
Well, there's actually a lot more to the history, but I don't know how much time you want to
Well,
devote to it.
we got, you got another 5-10 minutes if you want.
No, go ahead. Ask.
Camille?
Okay. Yeah, I want to point out that, okay, what kind of a ferry service are we talking about? The only really big ferry service that operated from the pier that exists, or it's closed now, was the original one that was built in 1926. All the other ferries that have operated since that time have operated outside of the marina. In other words, they came into the marina and then left. And those are the ones that Chuck mentioned that were not even viable, then even on a smaller scale like that. So this particular ferry would take, we would be rebuilding the pier. And there are many ways to skin a cat on that one. You would also have to dredge massively in order to get this ferry to be able to get up to the pier. one of the slides that we had flipping through here, and we have a map of it there in the museum, is this big, beautiful map of Berkeley. I don't know, it was about 200 years ago. And we're basically directly across from the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's this siltation that happens where there's this huge beach that used to be out there. Well, you don't see it anymore, but it's still really shallow. So it would take a lot to recreate, that kind of a ferry. So I'll leave my other comments later.
Okay.
2 microphones.
Any other comments about the history?
Well, just one thing. There have been 2. There was also an attempt in the 1870s to run a ferry, and it ran for 2 or 3 years. And it ran with a very small pier right near the mouth of Strawberry Creek. But it was subsidized by local businessmen. When the subsidies ended, the ferry ended. And then the ferry that the ferry pier that now exists was built in 1926. That ferry was up and fully running by about 1929, and it lasted for about 8 years. And once the Bay Bridge was completed, it failed. I mean, the building of the Bay Bridge, it was finished in 1936, and the building of the Golden Gate Bridge, which was finished in 1937, are really the final victories of the automobile in the Bay Area. And those 2 bridges knocked off what were the 2 most active ferry routes in the Bay Area, from East Bay to San Francisco and from North Bay to San Francisco.
Chuck, can I ask you?
Go ahead.
Could you maybe put the ferry service itself a little bit in the context of the other transit services that were available? Like you mentioned the key system when we were talking before. I was just maybe a couple words about what that was and how does the ferry fit in with the rail system, the buses, BART? Yeah.
That's a big question. Let me see if I can answer it really briefly. I mean, for almost all of Berkeley history, if Berkeley people want to take a ferry, they have to travel either to Oakland or Emeryville, or more recently to Richmond. As early as the 1870s, the Southern Pacific built a branch line from Oakland up to Berkeley along Shattuck Avenue that reached Shattuck and University in 1876 and got as far north as Vine Street in 1878. And that was the route that was most convenient, not only for the campus community that had begun developing when the UC moved to Berkeley in 1973, but also it was the most convenient route for West Berkeley, the older so-called Ocean View community. So it provided a kind of a place that brought Berkeley together, and that's one of the reasons that there was a central business district serving all of Berkeley along Shattuck Avenue. That took people down to the paddle wheel ferry that the Southern Pacific operated in Oakland. Then that system was challenged in 1903 by the Key system, which was a corporation developed by land developers, and it introduced fast electric transit, both local streetcar lines and faster interurban lines. And the interurban lines linked up to a ferry terminal in Emeryville, near where the toll plaza is today. And at its height, the Key system was able to deliver people from downtown Berkeley to downtown San Francisco during rush hour in about 35 minutes. We haven't ever done too much better than that ever since. But by the 1920s, the Key system was facing tremendous competition from the automobile. In 1917, I think there were 300,000 registered motor vehicles in California. 13 years later, in 1930, there were almost 2 million. Already by 1930, there was, I think, 1 car for about every 3 people. And the automobile not only took passengers away from groups like companies like the Key system, but it also interfered with their schedule. All of a sudden, the key system wasn't the king of the road anymore. All of a sudden, traffic jams and traffic signals interfered with it. And then finally, the key system had to pay to lay its own tracks. It had to pay the city for the use of city streets on those tracks. The private car, from the very beginning, was given huge amounts of tax subsidies. Basically, local, state, and eventually federal taxpayers were willing to pay millions and now billions or even trillions to build and maintain streets and roads and highways. So in a sense, I guess you could say that the beginning of the end of those private transit systems really do come with the rise of the automobile. And the attempt of the old ferry systems to adjust the car by establishing automobile ferries, like the one that occurred in Berkeley in the 20s, they kind of, even then, you have descriptions after a Cal-Stanford basketball game of the cars, the entire length of that 3-mile pier, waiting for another ferry to come, and another 40 or 50 cars would get on it. So, I don't know, that's a very brief thing, but the building of the two bridges really do establish the final victory of the car. The key system, in the 1930s, it came under the control of something called the National City Lines, which was a holding company controlled by auto and tire companies. And it began phasing out the rail systems and replacing them with buses.
Face the mic.
But
Face the mic.
as late as so by the time of World War II, the only key system trains that were still running were those who went across the bridge. The lower deck of the bridge was originally reserved for trucks and trains.
So can I ask, do you see a future for ferries at all? Maybe we just get so clogged up with cars that, cars are going to have their heyday. Is there a future here? Because we just looking at big expansion plans. Is this the way to go?
I mean, one of the things, in 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake closed the Bay Bridge, and all of a sudden, the state was willing to give money, emergency money, to run a ferry from Berkeley to San Francisco. But once the bridge reopened, that money stopped. I mean, I think the question of whether or not we want a ferry system is whether or not we want to pay significant taxpayer subsidies to run a ferry system. And I'd love to take a ferry from Berkeley to the ferry building and have lunch and come back. But I guess the question is, does it make sense to provide subsidies for that kind of a system?
Speaking of the finances, let us switch now to Randy Rentschler. Randy, you're an expert on transit financing, and you wrote the legislation that created WETA and the measures that fund it. What are your thoughts on the financial feasibility of the Berkeley Ferry project?
So I'm just going to stand up because I'm better that way. So look, I have been around this public transit ferry thing for a really long time. My wife says I haven't heard everything, but I've heard most of it. And look, today we're talking about transit, access to the waterfront, parks, parking. Like, what could go wrong, So look, let's put this in context. So public transit in the Bay Area is about a $6 billion business every single year, okay? Ferries are 1% of that, just 1%, barely anything, okay? Public transit, mostly people think buses and BART, is funded by sales tax dollars. There's exceptions to this, like AC's one of only 2 bus operators in California that actually get property tax. But let's not dive into the weeds. But if you want to talk about the weeds, like I can, okay? Ferries are funded with toll money, okay? So for those of you concerned that, oh my God, we're going to subsidize ferries and can't we do better than that? It's like, stop, okay? The two are not mixed, okay? So the toll money is what makes SF Ferry go. Like that's what happened. So you voted a handful of times to increase the tolls. Those tolls go to WETA. They fund ferry service. So if it doesn't come to Berkeley, it's going to go to somewhere else. It's going to go to Alameda or Richmond or fill in the blank, okay? So just make sure you understand how that works, okay? So you don't feel bad, okay, like you're screwing the bus operators. You're not, okay? Look, in my few minutes, I'm going to touch on a handful of things. One of them is just going to be how the system works, a little bit on air quality, a little bit on kind of transit culture.
Closer to your mouth.
And I'm going to try to leave my opinions out of it. What matters is you have informed opinions. That's what matters more than anything else, all right? So one thing to keep in mind is that even AC Transit, okay, is running at about a 7% fare box recovery. So that means 93% of all the costs are covered with tax dollars. All right, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Okay. In the 1970s, AC Transit operated 100% from fares, to give you a sense. Crazy, I know. Okay. BART traditionally was the best performing transit operator really in the country. High fares, okay, high ridership. But COVID crushed everything, okay? So it probably halved AC Transit's fare box recovery. BART went from like the mid 60s and 70s down to 25%, okay? So one question for Berkeley is, okay, who's gonna get us to San Francisco? Okay, because AC Transit has cut a lot of the service that goes to the city, okay? Most likely, AC Transit will not restore that service. Most likely. Most likely, they're gonna cut more. Most likely, okay? So if you're looking for options to get into the city, if that's what you care about, ferries are something that might be something you wanna think about, okay? You will all get a chance to raise your taxes in November. Are you familiar with this, everybody? Yes, okay. So you can raise your taxes by another half-cent to try to forestall what's almost certainly gonna happen if the taxes don't pass, and that is significant reductions, like significant, like you've never seen before, okay? If that doesn't pass. It's likely to be litigated by the Harvard-Jarvis Taxpayer Association. So this will get really fun, really fast. All right. Another thing to keep in mind is like subsidy per passenger, right? Everyone gets stuck on that, okay? So generally speaking, for most bus operators, we're subsidizing each ride by the tune of about $14 per person, okay? BART, because the ridership's higher, is about 10, okay? Ferries, anyone want to guess? So it's less than that, okay? It depends on the route, okay? So the city of Alameda is going to be lower, Richmond's going to be higher. Yeah, but system-wide, it's about 25 to 35 per ride. Okay, so you might be thinking like a round trip. Okay.
Let's not
Well,
debate it.
No, in any event, I'll just tell you what it is. So for the ferries, it's going to be more. Okay, all right. So the basic operating model for ferries in this country, particularly in the Bay Area, is this. Okay, the ferries come to a place and you deposit your riders to San Francisco. That place, Alameda, Richmond, doesn't matter where it is, there's one exception in the Bay Area, has a parking lot there, okay? Because that's the only way it works, okay? People are not gonna transfer to buses, they're not. Like, I wish they would. I mean, I'm not gonna, but I wish they would. Okay. All right, or like I vote for taxes so they take transit and I can drive my car. Okay, that's common plan, all right? So look at Alameda. The developers put in the ferry terminal. The city provides them a parking lot. That parking lot is completely filled. Okay, they charge for parking now, which I'm not for. It just raises the cost of transit and makes people drive, but we can have a religious conversation about that later. And there's so many bicyclists that come that the ferries can't take the bikes anymore. Like, it's filled. Okay, they can't get on the boat with their ferry, with the bikes. They have to park them, okay? So this is a successful ferry operation. That's what it looks like. Bike lanes, parking, and reasonably good service. There's only a handful of places in the Bay Area where this can work, okay? So when you think about the service, I hope you're timing me to make it.
You're good.
Like Richmond, it's a long ride to Richmond, okay? If you want to go on the peninsula, it's a long ride to Redwood City, okay? But Berkeley's in this really good sweet spot, okay? It's a relatively short ride to the city. So would it work in Berkeley? So the question is, we don't know. We've never really tried it. Okay, think Alameda, big parking lot, brand new things brought you by other folks. Sorry. It's so loud. I don't want to be so loud.
Be loud.
And so we don't know if it would work in Berkeley. It'd probably take a handful of years to know. Like WETA would have to commit for a handful of years. The city would have to commit for a handful of years to really know. So no one can predict the future. Like, I've given up trying. So the question is, we don't know. But we do know this. People will not ride a bus and transfer. They won't, okay? I wish they would, but they're not going to, okay? But if you could provide good bike lanes and other things, you at least have a chance, okay? I know that's controversial here. Let me see what else I got here, and then I'll quit. Oh, air quality. So ferries are notoriously dirty, okay? They are. I wish they weren't. They're way better than they used to be, okay? But I can tell you, 5,000 diesel buses plying the roads of the Bay Area, often very empty, okay, is not really great for the environment either, okay? It's not. So public transit, you got to take it for what it is, all right? By the way, the organization I used to work for used to do air quality conformity plans with the air district. So just think about this, okay? If every single transit project you ever imagined was built, okay, it would have no effect on the Bay Area's air quality. None. Okay, now if we completely changed our housing policy and all those people, like there's 7.5 million people in the Bay Area, if all those people didn't have to drive from Livermore, that would change our air quality. So if you're one of these people who like, I'll be damned if we're going to build a parking lot, subsidize those rich folks who ride the ferries with polluting boats, okay? Like, don't let me take away your joy, okay? All right? But the fact of the matter is, none of it will move the needle at all, ever, okay? What else? Oh, last thing is culture. So public entities provide culture for its residents, okay? There's very little transportation culture that exists, but there are some exceptions. One of them, obviously, is the cable cars in San Francisco. Like, I can tell you how they pencil out. They're not great, okay? But it's part of the culture of the Bay Area that we live in, okay? So is the historic streetcars, also in San Francisco, okay? So is Caltrain, weirdly, okay, in San Mateo County. People are very attached to their old Southern Pacific station, like more so than all you think, okay? The other one is ferries. Ferries are a significant cultural part of the Bay Area. They really are. So I'm for judging public improvements by more than just how they pencil out, okay? So that's the world of ferries. that's a good outlook about how public transit works. And I hope it helps you decide what you think about this subject.
Okay, Camille, can you have any comments to make
Sure.
relative to this question?
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Randy. I want to just sort of preface my question or my comments with this question. Is there any level of boondoggle beyond which WETA might just say, no, let's not do that? That's what I'm curious about, because we've got a public agency. Okay, they don't have to make a profit. You know, they're gonna get our bridge toll money. They're gonna do what they do. What do? They build ferry routes. Once they build another one, they have to look for someplace else. So that's their job, just to build ferries until they can't. So, you know, I liked ferries. Who doesn't like ferries, right? There's, you know, we mentioned the Richmond Ferry, there's Vallejo. A lot of these, you know, wow, Vallejo cuts off a huge amount of traffic that you would otherwise have to drive through to get from Vallejo over to the city. The Genentech employees leaving out of the Berkeley Ferry, they went down to South San Francisco, Oyster Point around there. That cut out a huge amount of driving for them. I get that. What I'm just wondering about is this short hop across the bay when we have a city with 3 different BART stations, and I'm saying the AC Transit's going down, but we're very close to the base of the Bay Bridge. It's not just that, you know, let's have a ferry, or let's have some culture here. Ferries are fun. It's that this particular ferry proposal would be, from what I can tell, the only WETA ferry that's plopped down in the middle of a pre-existing park recreational area. All of the other ones, Alameda, Seaplane Lagoon. Seaplane Lagoon was started up there on this old naval base. It's toxic waste, you know, site practically, right? Nobody's going to be swimming in Seaplane Lagoon. Alameda, Oakland, those are all very industrialized areas, and any sort of extra pollution there from diesel or air quality, whatever put down there is really, you know, marginal. You know, my question is, you know, how do, you know, we think about this particular project? It's not necessarily bringing down the entire, you know, WETA organization, but does this particular project really serve the public interest?
One more minute.
One more minute. Oh, okay. And then, sure. I mean, we can talk about the different, the fare box recovery revenues, how much, you know, you get back on you know, the cost of a ferry ride. And, you know, just as far as efficiency goes, you know, looking at BART, and it moves millions of people every year. I don't think that the WETA system, I mean, I don't have the numbers right off the bat. I have them at home, but, you know, just a few thousand. Well, they have thousands every year. The difference is huge. And when we can talk about percentages, but when we look at dollars per ride, the dollars per ride, I think might be higher than the $25 that you mentioned per ride for the WETA ferry, and for you know, it's very, it's lower. It's lower for the BART and for the buses, and they also move a whole lot more people. So I will leave my comments there for now and come back.
Jim, would you like to comment on Randy?
Well, first I'm going to stand up so you can all see my T-shirt. I'm here for the parks. That's what I'm here for. I'm the recreational guy. I can debate Randy on costs, but that's not what I'm going to tell you. I'm a park kind of guy. I've spent 28 years helping people get to the shoreline and built Middle Harbor Shoreline Park in Oakland. I served for more than 15 years on the waterfront and the Parks Commission here in Berkeley. And I ran campaigns in Berkeley in 2014 to increase the parks tax, in 2016 for Measure T1. Those raised $120 million for much of it went to the parks, and all of the parks tax did. Imagine my surprise to discover that not one dime of the increased parks tax actually went to maintain the parks at the marina. I explained that in my first editorial, which is in the back. Not one dime. The entire Berkeley waterfront, so the entire Berkeley waterfront is designated as a waterfront park by the Bay Conservation Development Commission. Cell phone data shows that about 1.8 million people use that park in 2025. It's a lot of people. That's actually more than go to Yosemite. That's a lot of people. And as Camille has said, this proposal is unique in that WIDA and Bayfair and Berkeley now propose a commuter terminal in a park. As Randy has said, and he said this a little more clearly in our preceding meetings, a ferry terminal needs lots of parking and lots of subsidy. It's more than he said. And you can look at my second one because I gave you the best estimate that I could get. Nobody's really very transparent about what the cost. Berkeley wants to accommodate 1,000 departing passengers on 265 parking spaces. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Where are they going to park? They're going to park in the recreational spaces, which are protected by very specific Bay Plan policies. Berkeley has said, oh, we have a parking plan. We're going to protect the recreational parking. But you know, they're 8 years into a planning process, and they have not figured out how to distinguish a commuter from a recreational user. 8 years in, $13 million in, and they don't know how to make the distinction. In 2019, I pointed out all those policies because I'd been on BCDC for 14 years. So now let's talk a little bit about cost.
Just a couple minutes, Joe.
Just
Jim.
one more paragraph. Berkeley's waterfront needs $130 million in repairs. Berkeley streets need $340 million over the next 12 years. How does building a ferry terminal fit into those priorities? How much will it cost Berkeley? It's at least $40 million. And the annual subsidy, we're not going to tell you about that. No, it's not going to cost anything. Trust us. How much will it cost Berkeley, and how will that decision be made? So does $40 million go right to the top of the list of all the infrastructure we need for a boutique service so you can get a drink on your way home? And then lastly, the comment on the environment. In the original document for expansion of the ferry system in 2003, the ferry system actually looked at efficiency. A BART ride versus a ferry ride. You think a ferry is going to be a little more inefficient? 92 times as much energy. 92 times. I have heard zero emissions until I want to throw up. It's almost 1% of a BART rider. And when the system crashed and people wouldn't ride anything, we'd lowered its fees to compete with BART. Now, what do you want to do? You want to spend 92 times as much so you can get a drink on your way home?
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Okay, Chuck, do you have any comments?
Right?
Your turn.
My turn to, okay. Well, let's see. One of the things that, when they're talking about the Berkeley Marina as a park and as a recreation site, again, that in many respects, that goes back to this history of transportation and transit. It was when the auto ferry ended in 1937 or 38 that it turned over its pier to the city of Berkeley. And at about the same time, the New Deal was providing money to build the Berkeley Yacht Harbor. So the real beginnings of the transfer of the Berkeley waterfront from a kind of working waterfront to a recreation waterfront actually does link into this history of transportation and transit. And then the other thing, when the Bay Bridge was built, in order to provide access for the Bay Bridge, the state provided money to build what was then called the East Shore Highway, a 4-lane highway along the Berkeley waterfront and the Emeryville waterfront. And that's really the granddaddy or the great granddaddy of what is today the I-80 freeway. But even that 4-lane road, and certainly the I-80 freeway, has completely separated the marina and the waterfront from the rest of the city. And I think that's one of the big differences between Berkeley and Alameda. The waterfront is geographically separated from the city in a way that I think almost no other waterfront in the Bay Area, or maybe in the world, is separated from a city. And again, that goes back to this history of and development of transit and transportation. So history matters. That's what I'm.
All right, history matters at the Historical Society. Yes. For Camille, the proposed location for the ferry is currently the site of a variety of recreational uses. Can you describe what those uses currently are and what benefits they provide?
Okay, all right. So how many
Get
of
close
you?
to the mic.
How many of you are familiar with the Berkeley Marina? Please raise your hand. Oh, man. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you for being here. I'm maybe talking to the choir here. Well, okay. I'm just going to go through what I'm going to say because a lot of people are not very familiar with it, and you guys can just spread the word. Okay. I think here's a little spin on thinking about it. It's a regional attraction. Okay, the majority of people from our surveys done by the city, myself, are coming from outside of Berkeley to come visit there. Okay, the frequency of visits is high. Over 50% visit once a week or more. Okay, cell phone mobility data that's available for this area shows between 2019 and 2025, okay, so after COVID, right, an increase in visitation of 20%. Okay, and that's with the pier closed, His Lordship's closed, the D&E docks, these big docks down there that have been being renovated for reconstruction, closed. They pinged 678,000 visits a year in 2025. Okay, I mean, that does got to get cleaned up a bit, but it's a big number. Walking, most popular activity, followed by sailing, boating, sightseeing, and photography, and then dog walking. Imagine yourself taking a drive down University Avenue. Okay, you're going to pass the Sea Breeze on the left, McGrath State Park on the right, then you're going to hit the marina at the end there. There's 1,000 berths there. Okay, within those 1,000 berths, you have 4 nonprofits: Cal Sailing Club, Pegasus, Blue Water Foundation, Berkeley Racing and Canoe Center. These groups here provide programming for the public, okay, for free. It's community services. Now, these groups get free berths in the marina. Why? Because they provide reports every year to the city of Berkeley to show a dollar value of the services that they provide through lessons or just outings and things like that, things that you can't get anywhere else for free. That value in the year 2020 was $355,000. How much were the free berths that they just gave up? $41,000. Oh, and there's only 10 of those berths. So we're talking about 1% of the berths in the marina. Okay, so the city is getting public services 8 times more valuable than the cost of those berths. And by the way, I mentioned the year 2020 because that's the last time we have a compiled report, because staff have not been putting these reports that these nonprofits have been doing year by year compiled together to city council. So a lot of city council don't even know about this. Yeah, so, okay, so moving along, go take a left. You've got Cal Adventures, UC Aquatic, that now called UC Aquatic Center, gives adult classes and summer camps. You also have the Cal Sailing Club dinghy and the windsurfing yard, Adventure Playground, Shoreberg Park. Then you get to the pier, the closed pier. Ken Jones is a famous fisherman who's literally written the book on pier fishing in California. said this was the most visited pier in the Bay Area. So now they're still fishing there. It goes under the radar because it's along the shoreline. You can actually see in our exhibit here, we've got what's called a fishing memories section where I actually surveyed over 200 fishermen down there and then actually did some audio clips of some of them. They're coming from all over. And what I was really surprised in this survey of 200 plus is, well, guess where the #1 city that they're coming from is. Guess, anybody want to guess? I heard Oakland. Oakland is #1. Berkeley is #2. Anybody want to guess #3? Keep going. Keep going. Sacramento. Those guys are coming here to get out of the heat, and it's easy peasy. I keep cranking the data, but it keeps popping up like that. So I think it's right. Anyway, and the racial ethnic background is much more diverse down at the waterfront. We've got a lower income group coming there more often. You can read my published papers on that point. Okay, then you get to the launch point at His Lordship's. His Lordship's lot, there's a little launch point for swimmers, kayakers, and windsurfers, especially during low tide there. Open water swimming really took off during COVID. Still very big there. Aquafile organization took over from the Odyssey. Now coming back out, if you go to the right, you go past the Double Trio Hotel, and then you get to North Waterfront Park, formerly known as Cesar Chavez. This is a 90-acre. It's the largest of the city parks, and then you also have a marine center there. So all of this has really substantial value. To answer your question about, what's it worth? I know Mitch does not want me to get academic here, but there are ways that economists have developed to estimate this social value. A trip to the beach, shoreline, water access, a fishing trip. All of us, a lot of us here really love the water and do water sports here. It's important to think about the demographics too that are served there, just as it is. 52% are 50 and over. The biggest income category of visitors is earns $75,000 a year or less. And the area itself, I mentioned it was more racially and ethnically diverse there than Berkeley itself. The coastline has traditionally or has often been more exclusive. Homes are more expensive near the coastline. Also, the population near the coastline in California has been shown to be less diverse as inland. Diversity is growing inland. So here you have a location that matches the more diversity that you get further away from your average coastline here. So these water access points matter. So those are my main points. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jim.
I'd like to add, Camille didn't give you the number, but each recreational trip I reviewed environmental documents. The Corps of Engineers built many reservoirs, and they always looked at the economic value of people coming to the reservoir and using it. If you look at those studies, you're looking at $50 to $80 of recreational value is conventionally what they think of. Multiply that by the 800,000 visitors on this side or the 1.8 million to the whole waterfront. You've got an economic activity that's very valuable. You can also look at it with other tools such as cell phone data to see how many of those people actually stay in Berkeley and spend some money. So there's an economic value to this as well as the cultural value. I tend to think that having recreational cultures, and there's about a dozen of different recreational cultures in the marina now, may be a little more important than being able to get a drink on the boat, but who am I to say?
Randy or Chuck, do you have any comments to make on Camille's?
Well, look, I'll just add a few things. Look, I think the ferries were a little bit mischaracterized. Sorry. Look, the ferry operation was a little bit mischaracterized. So this is the way you have to see them, okay? They can play hard to get, okay? This is not like a really big transit district that has an endless amount of money to run empty buses all over the geography of the Bay Area. That's not who they are, okay? They're relatively small. They don't have a ton of money, okay? There's a lot of communities that are begging and pleading to get ferry service in their community, willing to do things to make it attractive. So in San Mateo County, they built them an entire ferry terminal, okay? So if Berkeley wants ferry service, they're going to have to do something to get it. No one's going to jam it down your throat, okay? So stop worrying about it, okay? You're going to have to do something. So for those of you who have been to New York and seen their ferry system, what did they do? Anyone want to guess? They built very large condominium complexes right next to the ferry terminal because it was a redevelopment deal. That's why they did it, okay? With one exception, Rockaway Beach, where they have a dedicated bus service that goes and meets the ferries. The same is true here in Berkeley. You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to provide parking to have a functional system. And look, Bay Area Public Transit doesn't function on anything remotely close to economics. It's heavily subsidized, okay? So don't feel bad that Bay Area ferry service has to be subsidized. I mean, AC Transit's in the best transit market in the Bay Area, and it's carrying, 93% subsidy. So what is Berkeley likely going to have to do? It would have to put money on the table to build a terminal. WETA can get state money and other money. Together, you can have something collectively, but they're not going to do it for you. They're not going to do that, okay? It has to be subsidized. So if all of you don't want the ferries, look, you're in a great spot, man, because the city will have to want it, because WETA does not have a ton of money to just do it. Does that make sense? All right, good.
Okay.
Be clear about that.
Last but not least, for Jim McGrath, pretty much every important every important public policy decision involves trade-offs. Some things are gained and other things are lost. What are the trade-offs for the proposed ferry project? And what do you think is the decision-making process that will get us to a good outcome?
So I'm a bit of a contrarian, and I'm not going to answer that question quite so directly. I think you've seen the trade-offs between recreational use and commuter use. And you've also noted that we're talking about 1% value in terms of cross-bay commute, which is pretty small. So if this is something that you think is really cool and you're willing to pay for it, and we're talking about $200 million for the terminal and a whole lot of dredging and a whole lot of lost recreational values, and the annual subsidy that WETA has in their business plan is $9 to $12 million, and they want us to pay half. That's $6 million at least, or $6 million, and that's more than the marina budget. So, can you do this? But the larger sense of trade-offs, and Randy's talked a lot about, and some people have about ferries as, and he just did, ferries as a building block for your recreational system. I worked for the Port of Oakland for 16 years. I got the permits for the ferry terminal there. I didn't think much about it. Jack London Square built out with a whole bunch of residential use all around it. It's got a fairly robust use of ferries and 52% vacancies in the buildings in Jack London Square. So the idea that this is somehow going to revitalize the marina, The way to take care of the marina is stop skimming money from it. Tell the public, so process. This has been, we talked to you for 40 minutes, you get to comment for 2 minutes. We know that the people in the marina don't like it, so we're gonna try to find new users and cozy up to them. If the city wants a ferry, it's gonna need to put a lot of money into it. What part of that $200 million? I don't know. I wanna see a transparent process that tells me what the city budget is. I don't wanna see an EIR that has no costs in it. I wanna see a draft agreement between Berkeley and WEDA that talks about maintenance. I want to see a real good parking plan, and I want it to go to the voters. And having done big projects, the way you do that is you build consensus. You don't do it by hiding the numbers. You don't do it by hiding the ball. And you talk to people, and you know, maybe it has something for everybody. Or maybe if it goes into the marina and saves $100 million, it's possible. But it's not going to happen without a public vote. And you're going to have to take a different approach, in my opinion, if you're going to get a positive vote.
Chuck, would you like to comment on Jim?
Well, one of the things, I mean, we're throwing around a lot of statistics. I think it was Mark Twain who said that there's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Disraeli, actually.
Well, somebody said that. Anyway, and you know, I think we can see it here. On the one hand, you've got a statistic that says per person you're talking about a subsidy of anywhere from $25 to $75 per person, and yet, and that just seems absurd. But then on the other hand, you say, well, we have a $6 billion public transportation budget for the Bay Area, and less than 1% of that, right? Between 50 and 60 million is being used for ferries, and that also seems absurd. So I think we can throw around the statistics, but also ultimately it does kind of be a value issue rather than an economic issue. And you know, I think Jim is right that at some point it's going to, if in fact people want a ferry, it's going to have to be in some way or another through a vote of the people to, if nothing else, to authorize that, the amount of money that the city would have to pay as part of that subsidy.
Randy, would you like to comment on the trade-offs question? I think you've said it all already, huh?
I'm from out of town, man. You guys can do what you want to.
Camille?
Okay, I got a quick question then follow up on that. Okay, does it work that you could get WEDA to say, hey, look, you know, we don't want to.
Talking to the mic.
Okay. Talking about trade-offs, and I do have another comment too after my question.
Go for it.
Would it work by having a smaller scale ferry that goes inside of the marina? I mean, is WEDA open to that? Because there's a lot of people that have tried to, you know, have tried to suggest that so that we don't face the big cost of trouncing on all of the recreational activities and culture that exists there now.
So look, I don't run their ferries. I have a pretty good sense of how they're run, but think of it this way. So, you know, why is that big bus in my neighborhood? Like, why don't they run a smaller bus? Well, the economics of small buses are terrible. It doesn't make any sense to do it for a whole host of reasons, labor reasons, things that we normal people don't even think about, okay? So could SF Ferry save a lot of money by putting a smaller vessel? Look, you can ask them, but generally speaking, these answers aren't what you think they're going to be, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, I'm just going to reiterate, the bottom line is this. If people think that the synergy of waterfront transportation, more access to the water for more people is what you want, then look, you got a partner who wants to help you do that probably, okay? If people kind of like it the way it is, and we don't want a bunch of extra people down there, and we don't want to share our parking lots, and we don't want all of that, then just keep what you got. That's all. It's really simple.
Now, wait a minute. I spent 15 years helping Berkeley get money to improve access to the marina. And a whole lot more people have come there. I really actually resent people asserting that we're here because we like it the way we is. I worked hard and it worked. It got a lot more people to the marina. I let you go until that, but that one offended me.
All right, so to be clear, it's with WETA or transportation, it's go big or go home?
You know, my plumber visited my house the other day, and he said life can be reduced to plumbing and math. And I'm thinking, he's probably right. So look, this is a math question, all right? That's all it is. You either subsidize it or you provide access so people will pay to ride it. And even then, that's not a guaranteed outcome. So this is the plumbing and math thing. So if you want the ferries, you got to find the money to operate them. And it's just that simple.
Okay, thanks. So my comment then that I wanted to just kind of just flesh out a little bit is this idea of the ferry as an amenity and as a way to get our pier back as well. Again, this is sort of an odd WETA project because of the combination of a recreational pier with a ferry terminal. I don't think it exists anywhere else in the WETA system. So it's new for them too. It seems like the city lately has been turning the narrative back. They're sensing the opposition to a ferry, and the narrative is now being spun as, well, this is the way we can reopen the pier. You want your pier? You get the ferry, okay? And, you know, I'm kind of concerned about that because it seems for Berkeley's going to have to pony up money, whether it's going to do a pier with the ferry or just a pier. It's going to have to pony up the money. And I think that's what we can agree on as well. So the other concern is that the surveys that we've had out there is really showing that people like Chuck, and a lot of us like the idea of a ferry, but as an amenity. And is it really worth then? Are we going to be having that big old ferry there, but kind of empty most of the time? Is that worth it? And I think there's a question of ridership that it hasn't been clear that they're going to get the ridership that they are hoping for. So ridership and, you know, what are our alternatives? Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more comments from the panel, I'd like to have questions from the audience. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to stand over here, ask you to line up and ask questions. Susan, you're first.
I hope I don't talk too loud. I've just got more questions than ever, and I need to find each of you afterwards. What's that? Real close to my mouth. I need to find each of you afterwards. But I'm wondering, with the closeness to the Bay Bridge, Richmond Bridge, how come Richmond and Alameda in the history got it and we don't? Oh, well, is it because of that shoreline and the dredging expense? So when I heard about, you know, since the late 60s, I've been here in that pier, oh my God, every midnight out there walking and fishing. How come when I saw all the plans that the city, our new city council, I don't even know what we're doing with the new mayor and the new city council if they're not getting reports. But the old city council put up all of those videos of their plans on the city council meetings, and I'd either Zoom or go to the meetings, and that was huge. The question is, the proposal that used to be for the ferry coming in, is that it? We lose the coastline and the access to our waterfront if we have that big plan. And is there something smaller?
So in 2008, there was a proposal and $30 million from the legislature to build a ferry in Berkeley, and they never finalized the EIR or the project for it. The money went to Richmond. If they put it in the marina, it probably could have been done for $30 million at the time.
Okay, close to the mic. Okay, so I wanted to congratulate the Historical Society for the most precisely timed event, because it is exactly 100 years since construction of the Berkeley Pier started. It was approved in summer, and I wanted to highlight something that Chuck mentioned a couple of times, which was the ferry was an auto ferry, and it was so people could drive their cars on the bay. That was the motivation for it, and Chuck talked a bit about how that worked out. So when people think historically of the Berkeley Ferry, it was to move cars back and forth in an era when cars were becoming incredibly important. And as another historical note, Berkeley engaged in this fantasy for about 50 years of everybody wants to come to Berkeley. So every transportation improvement that was promoted, including the Caldecott Tunnel and the East Bay Freeway and the streetcars and all, was people outside Berkeley, if they can get here easily, they'll come here and they'll shop. That's what the business people wanted. And in fact, as soon as all these improvements were built, Berkeley people went out to shop elsewhere. But my question is, there are two elephants in the room. One is sea level rise, and the other is the inevitability of a major earthquake. If the panel can comment on if a ferry was magically built tomorrow, we know that sometime in the next few decades, there's going to be a huge earthquake that will liquefy much of the marina, and we're going to be going up with a minimum of 3 feet sea level rise, maybe 8 feet.
Look, I'll take on the E in WIDA is emergency. And it was for the very exact reason that the speaker just mentioned. As an emergency response, they can put dock facilities and shallow waters, like it's part of their mission, and they train on that. So that's the E part. As far as climate change, I'll leave it to somebody else.
Climate change. All I can say is at our waterfront, we do have some climate change studies. The major parts that's going to be inundated is that, I think that North Basin, and as you go out University Avenue, that little area there. I believe BCDC is requiring the city of Berkeley to raise further the pier structure in terms of the design that they have been presented with. As far as the emergency liquefaction question, as far as the earthquake, can you say anything about like how the electrification would work in terms of, and how it would hold up in an emergency?
Look, we don't know these things. Look, CARB forever has been pressuring public transit to shift from diesels to something else. And so this electrification of the ferries is just a CARB regulation at this point. So look, maybe our children will still be alive when this happens, but I'm not optimistic.
Could I just, historically, when the 1906 earthquake and fire occurred in San Francisco, the huge ferry system that then existed, people could leave, the ferries provided free transportation out of San Francisco. They refused to let people come into San Francisco, but it really did provide for refugees, particularly coming here to the East Bay. Berkeley's population tripled between 1900 and 1910, and a lot of that was due to these refugees who came to Berkeley, and many of them came initially because of free ferry service. I think one of the reasons why WITA was formed was because of the experience in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, where the Bay Bridge was closed down. And, you know, in answer to an issue that Camille raised a few minutes ago, when the Bay Bridge was shut down temporarily, the state did provide money for ferry service between Berkeley and San Francisco, and it did operate out of inside the marina, and it did operate on smaller boats. They were, I think they were the tour boats for the red and white, and blue and gold fleet, which are hold quite a few people, but were smaller than the current ferries. And I've got a hunch, although we'd have to go back and look, I've got a hunch that even with inflation, that probably the state subsidies to operate that system were no higher and maybe lower than the state subsidies, than the kind of subsidies we're talking about now for operating the system that WIDA would build in Bay Berkeley.
Okay, I have two questions, Camille. You sort of all these wonderful amenities we have, the sailing lessons and all these things, that they're all going to go away. Like, what is the impact on all of those recreation things? Do they go away, or how are they impacted? And the other question is, where are we in the process on this? And could City Council, like, what's the timing? And could City Council do this itself, or will it be put to a vote?
Okay, yeah, great question. Yeah. Okay. There's no real plan that says, okay, we're going to have the ferry, and then that means the sailing clubs have got to, I'll take the sailing clubs as an example, to shut down. No, that's not it. It's more of the impact of the project itself. Like Randy said, these ferry terminals, these ferry systems start from a big parking lot. And parking has been a real big issue in all of this. In order to accommodate this particular ferry, they are expanding the seawall lot. It'll be just a big parking lot there, a lot of it dedicated for ferry parkers. And they're actually, the South Cove lot, they're where a lot of the recreational people come, it was actually shrunk once they actually paved it over. It looks really nice, but it's smaller now. And then there's a lot of very, very complicated parking management implementation about how long you can park there. It's not there now, but it's coming because of the accommodation for the ferry. They're really trying so hard to squeeze this parking lot into that place there. Like Jim said, like maybe it starts out at 400, 500 parking spaces that they need, but they really are only, say, providing about 200. So there's a concern that the whole area will be overwhelmed in order to accommodate the ferry. Parking's a major one, but also just the whole character of the area itself and how it serves the public. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Paul Kamen. I'm a naval architect by training. I love boats, I love ships, and I even love ferries. And I think Berkeley wants the ferry. But first, to correct a misconception, those of us advocating the ferry terminal inside the harbor are mostly advocating a ferry of the same scale, same size boats, same service. It doesn't have to be of the less efficient, smaller boats. Question for Randy. When you cite the proportion of budget being, proportion of the ferry budget being a tiny percentage of the overall transportation budget, that really doesn't mean anything unless you also cite the percentage of ferry riders compared to the percentage of riders on other transportation modes. I think you'll find that the subsidy level for the ferry is still far higher. You know, everyone here can do the math. It's not even math, it's just arithmetic. If you take the annual WIDA budget and divide by the number of one-way rides, you get that very big number. But the problem with with the proposal to build what's essentially a new mini marina outside the existing marina is that the public process was so badly flawed. We never got any public input on actual substantive alternatives. The only alternatives we had were different shapes to the breakwater, and it was rearranging the deck chairs kind of thing. So I think we need to back up a little bit, go back to a legitimate planning process, and see if we can get something that's a little bit more reasonable. But I do want to have the ferry.
Any comments from the panel?
Hi, my name is John Steer. My name is John Steer, president of Berkeley Partners of Parks, and like Jim, I share a strong interest in maintaining our parks and improving them. Question I have is the potential implications of Measure L here, which I think Measure L is basically requirement that any project which would put a existing park or parks, impact them in terms of land use, would have to be put to the vote of the public. So this is in Berkeley here, and so I'm wondering if this is a way for, we've been hiding the ball for a long time, but you alluded to that in terms of how funding for the parks, for the marina has not been coming out of the marina fund. It's going to have general fund, et cetera. And, and other matters that Camille referred to as well, that, the city has not been forthcoming in showing statistics around, the park use and so forth. And so I'm wondering here if there's a way that the discussion of Measure L going on the ballot, making this go on the ballot, would bring out some of the real issue, would actually bring out the facts and the numbers involved with whether the ferry would pencil out in any shape or form.
I'll tackle that. I was actually chair of the Parks Recreation Waterfront Commission when this was started as a study, and I supported that, looking at it, along with robust alternatives. And to answer Nancy's question, where are we in the process? So my assumption at that time was that they would use the commission structure to walk through those issues. John is right. The use of this area, in my opinion, requires a public vote under Measure L, as does the funding. And the funding is somewhere north of $40 million. Remember, this thing is about $200 million as a project plus annual. And the way to do that, in my view of how process should be done, is you spend some time looking at that issue, and you go into some detail on what the trade-offs are, what the interests are of the people who are already using it, whether or not they'll be displaced or they just think they'll be displaced. So we are at a point where the city has issued a draft EIR. They have 1,400 comments on it. I think my comments were about 50 pages. I think Camille's group was about 100 pages. They are going to finalize that, and then they will have to go to BCDC for permits, and then they will have to go to many agencies, and then they'll have to figure out funding. And until there's a more amenable process, I think they're going to have a lot of people appearing at all of those regulatory hearings urging that it be denied.
Any other comments? Chuck?
Yeah, I think the history of Berkeley politics makes it absolutely clear that there's going to be, that if in fact you want to go ahead with ferries, there's going to be a public vote on it one way or the other, whether it's done through Measure L or whether just people, will put the measure on the ballot. The citizens will. So I think there will be. I can't conceive that there won't be a public vote if in fact the city council or others go ahead with the idea of trying to go ahead with the idea of the ferry system.
A lot of us miss having access.
I just wanted to comment on that. A concern, if it ever does go to the vote, though, is, and this is why we're so happy to see you guys here today, is that a lot of people don't know what goes on at the marina. It's the other side of Berkeley. So spread the word.
Okay, a lot of us miss having access to the pier. Those of us who've been here long enough to remember when there was a pier, and we would just walk down there. It was a center of enjoyment for many people, whether they fished or not. We're told that it's been closed for years because it's so unsafe, and the only way we'll get it back is if we approve of this huge ferry. Well, people who seem fairly knowledgeable have suggested in a couple of forums that I've been at in the past couple of years that perhaps we need to evaluate how unsafe it really is and how expensive it would be to simply restore it for its original uses. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So the structure of the pier right now is it's not going to fall down in an earthquake, but I wouldn't want to be on it. It doesn't have side, in any kind of shear effects. It can't hold trucks, and it's not high enough for sea level rise. There's been a pretty robust planning process involving BCDC and their engineering criteria review board. There's a very good new design. Is there another way to build it? You betcha. Years ago, I hit up Nancy Skinner for money for the pier in a Zoom meeting, and she says, "Well, there's money in the budget, but Jim, the city has to ask for it." So they did, and Nancy sent the city of Berkeley through the Coastal Conservancy $15 million that could have been used to build the pier. They chose not to do that. The city council, $15 million was here. With the current estimates, if the city had matched that with $15 million, which is way less than they would have to pay for this, they would have 2,000 feet of pier today. You may understand from that why I'm a little irked.
Yeah, one of the slides I had up here in the slideshow at the beginning was basically a cost graph like that. And in terms of how much it cost as you got, further out on the pier. And right now I got some numbers that say a pier only. And as far as the safety goes, there's a big engineering study about restoration versus replacement. So we could debate that. It seemed like the most economical way to fix the pier was to actually just replace it. And you can replace it 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. The cost of 1,000 feet alone, pier alone right now, and these are numbers I'm working on here, you guys can, this is from the city's data, $16 million for a 1,000-foot pier. How much are we in it for this pier ferry project? $56 million. Okay, so we can refine those numbers for you guys here soon. A 2,000-foot pier, just recreational only, $28 million. All right, so there you go.
Okay. Last time we were here, not quite as many as today, we heard about nature-based solutions to respond to sea level rise. What is the trade-off here? Could you comment, does the ferry collide or support nature and nature-based solutions for the bay?
Somebody better take it.
You want to take it?
Look, I don't, it's so funny. I don't work for them. Sorry, look, I don't work for them. I suspect they have something. You could go look for it. But that issue isn't just going to be in Berkeley, that's for sure.
It's really pretty neutral. Berkeley is working on a very small grant for resilient shorelines that's more about aquatic park and the shoreline down towards Ashby Beach. The shoreline fronting this is a rock revetment that, and it's good till about year 2100. So resilient shoreline and a ferry, they're really independent issues. It's not going to affect it one way or the other.
Kelly, were you asking if this project was environmentally sound? Was that the question? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I think 400,000 yards of, cubic yards that have to be dredged out to accommodate this ferry, and it's going to be possibly a 400 passenger foot ferry, and the dredging goes all the way out parallel to the pier. I think there's a lot of issues with environmental impacts. Whether they can mitigate those, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's problematic.
Can you hear me? So the first thing I want to say is that I like ferries. Every time I go to New York, I ride the Staten Island ferry, and I have started taking the ferry from Lower Manhattan to Brooklyn. And I take the ferry from San Francisco to Sausalito and Angel Island. I like ferries. I have seen multiple studies and questionnaires and surveys, all of which have pointed to the notion that a ferry in Berkeley is preposterous and a boondoggle. And it keeps on coming back. No matter how many times the survey says and the proposed budget says that it's preposterous, it doesn't work. You can't do it without massive parking and screwing up the marina. You know, you can build the pier back out without having a ferry, and it'll cost much less. Where does the push for this boondoggle keep on coming from?
Okay, hang on. I'm going to get in a word.
Unions.
Well, I would like Randy to weigh in on this too. This is a public agency, and people are looking for transportation. This is a ferry agency, and it's a public agency. So what does it do? It builds ferries. It's been having its eye on Berkeley for a long time. The one proposal got killed back in 2008, I think it was, because of feasibility, low ridership projections, and some environmental concerns. Even if we say no to the ferry this time around, it will come back again, because that's just what this agency does. It builds ferries. Yeah.
Well, they operate ferries too, so.
Look, I just can't,
operate.
I can't help myself. Look,
Go ahead.
people need to be careful about how they characterize public agencies. Okay, this is not a rogue.
Look closer.
I said people need to be much more circumspect and careful about how you characterize these public agencies, okay? So my answer to your question about why this keeps coming back is because people in Berkeley keep talking about it, okay? That's why. So I'll say it again. SF Ferry doesn't have that much money. They are not dying to spend what little money they have on bad service anywhere, okay? They're having service problems with a handful of places, all right? The issue for Berkeley is why they keep talking about it is probably because your civic leaders keep talking about it, okay? Probably, okay? So SF Ferry, you need to see them for what they are, a relatively not rich, small provider of boutique services in the Bay Area, of which if you look at a map, okay, Berkeley is in a pretty good sweet spot if Berkeley wanted it, okay? You just have to, you gotta start looking outside yourself. So I'll say it again, stop looking outside yourself, all right? So you have a partner that may be able to help you achieve a goal that you might want. I mean, this group probably doesn't want it, okay? But really, like, go easy on our ferry friends. They're good people. I know them well, okay? They're not trying to do anything bad to you. I promise. Promise.
Okay, go ahead, Chuck.
Well, it's too bad that Councilman Taplin isn't here today, because he's one of the most strongest supporters of the ferry, and he would, I think, probably give you some idea of how much political support he feels there is for ferry in Berkeley.
Okay, last question. Next to last.
First of all, is that the right volume to get? Okay. First of all, thank you so much for this really interesting presentation. I am curious, with AC Transit buses running empty and BART deep in the red financially, and ferry problems with the same company and other terminals, why throw another form of public transit into the mix rather than revitalize and expand the existing ones? Is there historical precedent for times of low public transit usage that adding more of it has solved those problems? Or is there any reason to think that that would make sense in today's economy?
So look, I'll take part of that on. So look, the first thing is the ferries are only funded with tolls, okay? So with toll money. Now look, we didn't make that decision, the legislature did, okay? So doing more ferries won't do anything to your public transit system, period, okay? It's likely to go broke all by itself, okay? So the ferries have limited money, okay? And they review, in fact, I did when I worked for MTC, reviewed the performance of the ferries to make sure the ferries were the only organization in the entirety of the Bay Area that had performance requirements. Oh, the only one, imagine, okay? So WETA cannot afford to have ferry services that don't perform well. They cannot, okay? Now, if you're Samtrans or a lot of other transit districts, you can afford bad service forever, okay? So the answer to your question is, does WETA have enough money to provide another community with ferry service if that community does what it has to do to make it possible? The answer is yes, okay? But that means communities have to do a lot. They got to put a lot on the table to get the boats. Does that make sense? All right, good.
Let me add to that. There's a perception that money coming from MTC and the federal government is free money. And indeed, it doesn't come from local budgets. But I'll give you an example of a project that there's been a fierce debate on, and that's the BART connector to Oakland Airport. $484 million. I looked up the numbers last night. 2,600 passengers a day on the average, which is about twice this level. That's a lot of money if you've discounted $484 million. Some people think that's a great idea. It's about 8% of the passenger load. That's what you get for $484 million.
Today I was really surprised to hear that taking a bus to a ferry would not be the most ideal way to go to ferries, because we had been hearing that would be the way that people would get to this ferry. There would be parking, but there was an idealization that buses would be taking people to the ferry. As everybody in this room probably knows, there's a boondoggle on I-80 that going to, for example, the marina, the traffic is really bad. The traffic is really bad on I-80 from like Powell Street to Cedar Street. I know it. I live right around there. It seems to me that this is, I'm shocked now to hear that to go to the ferry, people are going to be driving their cars. People will also be bicycling for sure. And so that will increase the traffic. Has the city of Berkeley done any research to kind of guess how much the traffic would increase to go to the ferry?
Yes, they just made assumptions. They didn't use the actual mode splits that were available in other things. So basically the East Bay terminals, about 60% of the people drive. The first estimate from Berkeley was 58.5. That would be 600 parking spaces that they needed. So they just said, well, we'll just make assumptions.
I want you to take the bus to the ferry so I can drive. Okay? Because that's how everybody thinks. Okay? look, AC's tried to connect Alameda buses to the ferry. It happens in New York City. Golden Gate's tried it for decades, but we can't force people to do things that they won't do.
No, exactly, but it is going to make the boondoggle and the traffic worse, is what I've heard today.
Well,
That's what
you
I've heard.
know, the worst part about traffic is when you live in Detroit and you don't have any.
I'll take one more stab at answering that question. All right, and at the risk of being really boring with some numbers, I'm really sorry, but the environmental impact report that they had to file actually had those exact numbers. The traffic in the marina, and they measured it out, it's called average daily traffic, something like that, would increase 77%. Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking my question, and thank you for this has been fabulous. I have a very small kayak. I have a very small boat. So my question is very small, and it's about the parking management that is planned, which will precede the potential of the ferry. So my question is there I think there is some kind of a conceptual link between the parking management, read parking meters planned for the area immediately in front of Cal Sailing, because that's what where all the kayakers work and the sailors and the swimmers. Are those two things intimately linked? Can we disentangle them? That's my question.
Okay. Okay. Well, the city will say no. That they started this parking plan. I guess it was 2025. They started this idea, and they kind of sprung it on the commission too. They just came up with this plan and then slipped it over to City Council for she's talking about the paid parking plan that everybody's in a hullabaloo about over the last year. It focuses on the 3 lots, South Cove East, South Cove West, and J and K lot. Those are in the south waterfront, very, very close to where the ferry terminal is being planned. Only for those lots, even though there are many other lots down over on North Waterfront Park, Spinnaker Way, that get filled up a lot too. No paid parking there, okay? So anyway, this little plan gets slipped in here, and they haven't started the meters yet because they have to still go through some BCDC hoops. That's the other agency there. I think it's a little bit suspicious, and I'm talking about my own personal opinion, that suddenly we have a paid parking plan just in those particular lots right before this fair thing. So that's my answer then. It's a very convoluted process right now. The ones over in Spinnaker, in a seawall lot, is called, that's considered under the ferry plan. And that's where you can park all day for, I think that's going to be charged there too. But they have this other plan for the South Cove lot ahead of, and the J&K lot ahead of it. So I think they're linked. Yeah. Actually, if you all could please take this flyer, or if you will see me afterwards, you can take a picture of this. I don't think City Council right now is in the mood to back away from that plan. They might, but there's going to be a big meeting at BCDC on this paid parking plan this coming week on August 6th. And if anybody wants to send in public comment, that would be incredibly helpful. I think the deadline for that is August 5th for the public comments. And you could read about that more from here and also on the BWCC website.
Okay,
Yeah.
We're way over time. I'm glad, but we are way over time. Thank you very much.
She's the last one.
She was way beyond the last one, and I already told her we're not having any more questions. So thank you very much to Chuck, Randy, Camille, and Jim.
Thanks, Tony.
And the museum will be open till 4:30. Come look at the waterfront exhibit.